Good morning. Good morning. It is a cloudy and rainy April Fool's Day morning here on the Burning River Browns talk. Oh, goodness. I'm just waking up. Hope you guys had a great Easter weekend. I hope you had a good Easter. I have an interview today with Jack Duffin that I'm going to play for you in a moment. He recorded it for me yesterday. I was very glad he was able to do that. Thank you very much for doing this for me, Jack. Also, keep in mind, it's April Fool's Day, so there might be a lot of false stories out there, and I almost fell for one as well, and I'll talk about that. And I will also talk about kind of what I thought of the interview. So the interview goes a little bit longer. It's going to be a little bit longer of a show today. I was supposed to be a 10-minute interview, but Jack and I got talking and we got carried away as always. But without any further ado, I'm going to play the interview. But before I do that, let me pause for a word from our sponsors right now. Okay, we're back. All right. It is time for me to go ahead and share on here. Let me do this. Share screen. Boom. Boom. Yep, this is it. Let me go right on over to here and I am going to play it. All right. Hey, thank you for joining me here. It is a beautiful Easter weekend here. I had the pleasure of introducing you to the Burning River Browns talk show on the Fanatical Elves Network, the salary cap expert from the Orange and Brown Report, the man himself, Jack Duffin. Thank you, sir, for joining me today.
Hey, it's always good chatting Browns. So
Oh
happy to
yeah,
be with you.
absolutely. We'll do it on a Sunday. We'll do it on a Monday. It doesn't matter. Thank you very much again. Let's go right into it. And I was telling, we were talking before we started recording. Was I had Cameron Justice on my show, and I wanted to pick her brain on, like, hey, the national media seems to really drop the ball on a move that the Browns made, because she felt that really they're not really looking at the Browns as making any big splash moves. And I said, we did make one prior to free agency where we traded for Jerry Jeudy. That was our splash move this offseason, I think. Now, the contract extension was widely misreported. Could you go into that, and what did they get wrong?
Yeah, so the initial report came out from Ian Rappaport that said up to 58 million. And by all means, anytime you read up to, just replace the words up to with not worth. It's probably the easiest way just to say it, because it's full of incentives. There could be $1 million a year if he wins the Super Bowl. It could be big stuff like that. That, hey, he might get it one of those years, but let's be honest, he's not going to win a Super Bowl every year. But some of these
Mhm.
incentives are tied up in like fantasy sorts of things, whereas it's better just to stick with the base numbers and then a little bit of those incentives either way. It's not the end of the world. So
Right.
when we got the real number, it wasn't 58 million, it was 52 and a half. So 17.5 million a year. What was just pure fabrication, though, was the guarantees. So it was initially reported as 41 million guaranteed. What was the real number was 28.1. And what was absolutely scandalous here is they took the fifth year option and went, oh, we'll just roll those guarantees into this deal and announce them here. It is two completely separate deals. So you had
Yeah.
the fifth year option and then you had this. And if the tweet would have been, he's now under contract for 4 years, including that 58 million, the
The fifth
fifth
year
year
option.
option, and then
Right.
put the guarantees in it, perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But what the tweet was just completely inaccurate reporting, and they need to do better.
Right. Do you think that was done because it was the Browns? Or what do you think would be the reason? I know it's a loaded question, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's nothing to do with the Browns. So this is the agents are the ones that feed the numbers to
Mm,
the key big reporters, because they want to make it seem like they did really good. Because if you're if you're this agent that's given the numbers to Rappaport, and then you're trying to sign someone, you can be like, oh yeah, we got this amazing deal for Jerry Jeudy, and people are like,
yeah.
oh, yeah, 41 million guaranteed, and that initial number just stays in people's minds long term. So it's media agents doing their jobs, and it can be tough in a way for the reporters, because Florio, that he does get a lot of stick. He said, look, I used to get these numbers, and I would go back to him and say, is this the real number, or is this you just giving me fluff?
Yeah.
Um, And when he started pushing back, he's just no longer on the text chains. So when the initial report goes to all the media guys, he's just not included because they're like,
Yeah.
nah, not interested in giving him the numbers because he'll push back. So it's tough because the media try and do their jobs, the agents are doing their jobs. And it's why I always say, give it 4 or 5 days once the initial report's out and let's see the numbers before we
Yeah.
know what's going on.
Now, his mentor, or it would be the person, or mentee, would you say it would be Amari Cooper? He idolized him. He played his game after him. I mean, what I'm talking about is Jerry Jeudy. Now, there's rumors. There was a rumor based on what happened at the owners' meeting, or what Andrew Berry said about Amari Cooper possibly being extended. And I know when we did an interview months back, you didn't think it was really, they might not really extend him too much. What do you think they're going to do with Amari Cooper?
I think you've got to let the draft play out first because
Okay.
say they're at pick 54 and Franklin drops to that spot and they draft Franklin.
Mhm.
I would say if they draft a wide receiver at 54, the chance of Amari Cooper getting extended significantly lower. Just because you've then got Tillman, you've got this young guy, you've got Jerry Jeudy, you're built for the future, and then you might not
Mhm.
want to go, hey, we want to extend Amari Cooper. It might be one that at the end of the season you then look at it and go, Tillman sucked. Franklin might have some potential, but he's not ready. We'll do it then. But you wouldn't. The minute you do that extension, you're saying to the young guys on the roster, you're not good enough. And if you've
Yeah.
just drafted Franklin, you can't before he's ever played a game go, yeah, you're not good enough. You can be the best you can be as wide receiver 3 for the next 2 years. That's you don't really want to be using pick 54 if
No.
that's the outcome. So I think what happens in the draft will be important. That's why I'm leaning they'll probably take a tackle, and then it leaves the door open to a Cooper extension. And I think something along the region of 75 million over 3, with 50 million guaranteed. So he's already under contract for 1 year. So effectively, what that would do is keep him under contract for that being then under contract for the next 4 years. The first 2 guaranteed, so 2024, 2025, and then they can get out of it after 2025. And I think that's a nice sort of balancing section where they're going to pay, rather than him getting 20 million for this next season coming up, they're going to give him 50 million over the next 2 years. Then they can get out of it and they can make that decision down the line. So I
Yeah.
think that's sort of a fair way to do the deal.
Well, right, and Amari Cooper is going to turn 30 years old in June, and it's that age. That's the analytics. That age. It's kind of like, oh, it's that gray area. That's when the injuries pile up. That's where the production drops. Normally, it isn't always the case with the players. And keep in mind, Jerry Jeudy is turning 25 next month, so he's young. He's about ready to hit his stride. I think in the right situation, he can be productive. I think that's what they're betting on too. I sent you an article. I'm not going to name the website that did about, but they're very negative. I noticed this, and they were talking about Nick Chubb possibly, but like the Browns might cut Nick Chubb after all this talk, because just all this positive talk that they were talking about how Nick Chubb's moving along in the rehab and he's already running, doing like load running, doing football running, which is great. I'm happy. I'm hoping optimistically week 5, week 6 he can play again. That's what I'm hoping for. And what's your take on what they're going to do with his contract, and how are they going to proceed forward with Nick Chubb?
Yeah, so he's due 12.2 million this year. So
Mhm.
that's the cash on what's on the table. None of that is guaranteed. So
Okay.
I think they need to go and have a basically renegotiate the deal. Go, look, you're not going to be worth the 2024 version of Nick Chubb's not worth 12.2 million, which is like a top 5 running back pay across the entire league. Just because, as you said, if he's going to miss 5, 6, maybe 8 games before he's like fully at go, well,
Mhm.
you pay. The initial contract was based on, hey, you're giving him 12.2 million to play 17 really, really good games. And if he's going
Yeah.
to miss potentially half of that, well, he's not worth that much money. So they need to get around the table and go, hey, we're going to guarantee it might be 6 million. It could be 6.2. And then we'll leave the other 6, so the rest of the deal, as incentives, and you can earn it back based on play time, other stuff. And then, hey, if he's ahead of schedule, he can get a bit more money back in his pocket. If he's a complete dud this year because he needs all that time just to rest up, he's earned 6 million. The Browns have saved 6.2 million. It's one where both teams can get something out of it. So
Mhm.
I think that's probably what you're looking at. But it's also one that they need to they need something that works for both sides. And you've
Yeah.
got no idea. And people say the cut Nick Chubb. You can't go into that renegotiation with the player and ask them to take a pay cut on 12.2 million without cutting them being on the table. And that's just life. If your boss at work comes to you and go, "Hey, we need to pay you less money," if
Right.
your boss isn't willing to let you go, you're never going to take that pay cut. If he says, "Hey, I'm not going to get rid of you, but would you mind taking 50% pay cut?" What person's going to look at that person? If your boss comes to you and goes, "Hey, if you don't take a pay cut, we're going to have to let you go," then
Yeah.
it's a real conversation. So cutting Nick Chubb has to be on the table if
Right.
a pay cut is on the table. But at the same time, they don't want to cut him. But we've got no idea what beyond 2024 looks like with Chubb. So let him play this year out. And I'd say it's the same with Amari Cooper. It's probably the best way. Let him play out the season. And then after the season, sit there and go, look. And it might be one you do in December rather than you let them get to free agency. And you
Yeah.
say, look, you've proved you're back up where you want to be. Let's do a deal, whatever it might be, 30 million over 3 years for Nick Chubb. And they can get something done. But we need to see him play before we can give him any more money.
Great. Yeah. That makes sense. It makes it. They're being the word, would the proper word be prudent, is what they're doing right now. That they're being prudent on it, and it's positive to hear that he's doing what. Because I was at the final home game against the Jets that Thursday night, which was like, I'm trying to think, it was like 2 o'clock in the morning for you. and he walked up the stairs and smashed the guitar before the game. I don't know if you heard about that. And we were
Yeah.
like, 6 weeks ago he had the ACL surgery and he's walking. I mean, the Cameron Justice, because she's right up and close and covering this team, and she sees these people all the time. She was pretty much saying that, hey, Nick Chubb is kind of like the heart and soul of the team, and they want to. It's not just like, oh, they're going to just cut him on a whim. It's on the table, but I don't really see that happening this season. What I do see is that based on, they're going to look at his performance in 2024 and his progress, and then renegotiate, including Amari Cooper as well. Now, the big story with the national media, I don't think they're biased. I just think they're lazy. And what I mean is they don't really take an analytical look like you do, or people that follow the Browns all the time and really get a chance to see what this team has done in the last 4 years building this roster. Deshaun Watson's contract is always brought up. 230 million guaranteed. 230 million guaranteed. Okay, they're talking about possibly another restructure for Watson. And you mentioned this before. It kind of explained this possible restructure with adding additional use of dummy years or void years. I'm not sure if they're the same thing or not. Go ahead and explain that.
Yeah, so I'll start with why you restructure. He's going to get paid 46 million this year, regardless. That's what's in his contract. It's fully guaranteed. So rather than doing the 46 million, and it would work as like an 18th of that, he would get paid through each week of the season. Rather than them do that, the better way of doing it is go, let's push that into a minimum base salary, like 1.2 million, I think is where he's at based on age. And then let's do the rest as a signing bonus. And that just moves that money out on the salary cap for years to come. And people are worried about stuff like whether it's dead cap, something like that. And it's just not an issue. And why you're moving that out is we look at the salary cap this year and in the region of 255 million, I want to say. It's a bit higher than that. It's 255 million
Yeah, I
is
think
where
you're
they're
right.
at now.
Yeah.
Yeah, 0.4. Whereas you get a few years down the line, and we're talking about significantly more. I'll see if I can find some of the numbers looking at, but
Because it
it
went up
gets high
18%.
really, really quick.
Yeah, they're anticipating the cap going up higher every year.
Yeah, it usually goes up about 8%. We saw a little bit crazy with the COVID stuff finally catching up because Last year was the final year where they were paying back some of the COVID debt that had just been collected because they didn't want to deal with the COVID sum all in 1 year of salary cap just because it would have caused absolute carnage. Whereas by pushing it back, it just creates a better business model for dealing with it. And then if we're looking at sort of where the salary cap could be in 2028, just shy of 350 million. So you're just talking about in 4 years. So 4 years' time, it could be about 100 million more. That's why I would say you push that money out. So you're still giving the player the money, but in terms of dealing with it in the salary cap, if you're dealing with $10 million this year, well, that's a significant chunk of the budget when your salary cap's 255 million. If you're dealing with 10 million in 4 years' time, well, it's a much smaller amount because the
Right.
cap's maybe 350 million. And so just by doing the same contract and pushing it out, if you paid it all up front, so you pay 46 million in each of the years, the percentage cost of the salary cap's about 93%. So you're saying the 46 million divided by the salary cap each year, about 93%. If you push it all the way out, you can go, it's below 80%. So that's the same 230 million, but you can be talking about 93% of the salary cap, or you can be talking about less than 80. And so there is a big
Yeah.
saving by pushing it out, and that allows Jimmy to spend more money. And the
Right.
way you would do this with Deshaun Watson, so if you're pushing it all the way out, you get a dead cap charge when he's all done and he's off the team of 89.5 million. People freak out at that, and it's like, yeah, it's not the end of the world because you just backload the next deal. So, say you signed another quarterback, you would just backload them and have a really cheap, like 5 million in year one. So, it all balances. But what the way you would need to do that and to stop the 85 million and split it over two is you effectively want to add a fake year. A dummy year is the most common terminology. And what you would do, you'd say to Watson's camp, we're going to give you a minimum base salary. So what it's 1 year extension in real purposes. And then if you're on the roster the third day of the league year, we're going to give you 100 million. Straight up, get 100 million. And Watson's camp goes, look, I know I'm going to get cut on day one or day two of that league year, but if you weren't to do that, hey, I get paid 100 million. So it makes no real difference to Deshaun Watson in terms of his earnings because he's going to be a free agent at the end of that time. So
Yeah.
he might go, look, we'll sign that. It allows the Browns to keep spending loads and loads of money, which puts more weapons around Watson, which increases the chance that he could come back to his best over the next 3 years. And then whether it's on the Browns or he ends up on another team, he is in a good spot to go forward. And I think that's probably the sale that they're making to him and his agent. And if they wanted to do that, it's not like a normal restructure where the language is in his contract. They just press a button and it's done. This is one where he would need to come into the building and sign a new contract that effectively gives him a 1 year extension, even though he'd get cut on day one or day two with a post June 1st designation. So it's just salary cap management, and it allows them just to move that money further back. And it's just they're more palatable when moving off of him.
Right. Now, is that different than void years that I hear? I've heard the void years before. What is there a difference between the two versus the dummy year and contract years?
Yeah, so void years are just there to split the signing bonus money out. So when you
Ah,
give a player a signing bonus, it splits by up to 5 years. The issue is
uh,
if a player's only under contract for, say, 2 more years, it would only
mhm,
split over those two. So you're creating fake years that um, they would expire before the end of the season. So it could be ridiculous stuff like if this player plays 100% of special team snaps, then they remain under contract, or it's all sorts of bizarre wording. But effectively, it's just there to allow him to
right.
leave at the end of that time. Whereas this is like a fake year. It's a real year that if you wanted to report it, you could go, hey, the Browns are going to pay Deshaun Watson 101 million for 2028. But in all honesty, everyone who's got half a brain cell looks at that and goes, they're just doing a bit of cat magic.
Yeah.
Doesn't cost the team
Well,
anything, doesn't cost Watson anything, helps out.
here's the last question I have. Are other teams looking at the Browns now and saying, let's see what they're doing? I mean, why aren't other teams managing the cap the way the Browns are? Because it seems like they're ahead of the game. And I'm not just being that as saying that as a fan. I mean, they're so far ahead of the game. I think people in the national media and pundits are not really seeing what they're doing. But go ahead.
Yeah, the issue is lots of the national media just don't understand the salary cap and stuff like that, so they just
Mhm.
prefer to steer away from it. Um, you've got the Eagles doing lots and lots of really smart stuff. So
Yeah,
with that
yeah,
sort of void years and the dummy years, the Saints are doing that as well. The Saints issue is, and I haven't gone all the way back to COVID, but they were doing all this cutting edge stuff, and then when the pandemic hit, the salary cap drops, and you can't prepare for that level of drop when you build this model. In the same
yeah,
way, if we had another black swan level event where the salary cap drops by a significant amount in a year, the Browns would be screwed. Just going to be honest about that. But at the same time, I would much rather we're spending 40 to 50 million a year more than league average
yeah.
than going, oh, I'm scared of another pandemic or another whatever it could be. And
You
then
can't
just,
live that way. Yeah, you
yeah.
can't really live that way. Right.
So go all in, and then we'll deal with the consequences if it ever arises. But some other teams, the 49ers seem to be getting smart, which
Yeah.
it's a shame that it's not like rubbish teams that are getting smart. I would rather like someone with Shanahan on the sideline isn't being smart, but hey,
Yeah.
it happens.
Well, I think they have an advantage of Brock Purdy still being under a rookie contract as well. I mean, they're not paying a Deshaun Watson to play a quarterback. Just yeah, because and just for people to know, if you didn't know this, Andrew Berry came from the Eagles organization, so he understands what they're doing, which makes sense. Like so, like maybe a handful of teams doing something similar to what the Browns are doing. I think other teams just don't have the money or the capital, the liquidity to do it. That could that change how the league does business in the future?
Certainly. So any team could do, in theory, what the Browns are doing. But if you're not willing to spend the extra cash and you're sat there, say the Bengals wanted to do what the
Right.
Browns are doing in terms of backloading these deals, they'd be sat there with like 100, 120, 150 million of extra cap space. And then they just look like they're not spending it because anyone can collect all this additional cap space to then use
Mhm,
down the line. But the issue is, unless you're going to go out and spend it, you don't want to create it and look like you're being
mhm.
cheap. Whereas
Yeah.
if they set their budgets each year and they go, hey, we'll have about 10 million of cap space, we can roll a
Mhm.
little bit over, we don't look too bad. And that's kind of what some of these teams that don't have the rich owners that can go in and inject a load of cash, that's what
Right.
they like to do because they want to hide this view that hey, we're not cheap. We've given this big deal to Burrow where they could go out and spend a lot more if they wanted to.
Right. Right. It makes sense. But if you don't have the cash, you don't have it. So
Yeah.
interesting stuff. I honestly think I'd like to point out to people where Vegas also did something. This is the last thing I want to that they have the Browns like not reaching the odds for them reaching the 8.5 win mark, which I thought was interesting. And I pointed this out to other people, including Cameron Justice. This team last year beat the number one NFC seed at home with PJ Walker starting at quarterback, and we beat the number one AFC seed on the road. We had Deshaun Watson that game. That was the last time we had him in 2023. That tells me we have a very good roster and a very good team. How well they do in 2024, who knows? But the roster is in place. What would you say to that? One
I
last thing.
think this roster's set to explode. I've got an article explode in a good way, not implode. But I've
Two
got an
different things.
article.
Two different things.
I've got an
Go ahead.
article coming out looking at how many players on each team are being paid 10 million plus this year. The league average is 6.5 players per team. The Browns are at 13, which is ahead of everyone else.
It's more than double. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're committed to this. Because the Browns are at 13, the 49ers are at 11, the Eagles are at 10, everyone else is single digits. So it's significantly different what the Browns are doing to everyone else. Just for everyone loves to know who's at the bottom. The Patriots are at the bottom with 3. But it's one that they're throwing the cash at it and they genuinely want to win. It's one now that they just need some luck. Because as if Watson plays like a top 16 quarterback, everything else is there. It's then you get to the playoffs, and sometimes it's your lucky day, sometimes it's not, and it can
Yeah.
be as brutal as that.
And that playoff loss to Houston wasn't as bad as it seemed, because I was pointing out but the back before the back-to-back pick six interceptions returns for touchdowns, we were driving. The defense just stopped them. We were driving. Another misleading stat was the defense points allowed on the road. I can give you 5 or 6 games where the offense put the defense either the offense gave up the points on turnovers, or the defense was put in such a bad position where it was more than double digits points on that one. Because I could tell you Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Seattle, Denver, Rams, just that's 5 right there. So that's a little bit misleading of a stat too. The defense performed pretty well on the road, not as good as at home, but we also led this. We led the league in turnovers. And look, that's just this is a very good team. And I'm trying to tell people, the national media, maybe they'll catch on after the end of 2024. If I think with luck and health would that best put us in a position to contend for the division and the AFC Championship. So hopefully by the end of the year, we're heading to New Orleans for the Super Bowl. That's where it's going to be at next year, correct?
Yeah.
I think,
No,
yeah,
get to the playoffs, and then luck and other factors come into play because it's a
absolutely.
one-off game. But the it was former Newsom, former Ravens GM,
No, Ozzie
Ozzie
Newsome, the
Newsom.
former Brown Stadium. Yeah,
It was I forget the full comment, but he basically said the GM's job is to make a roster that can get to the playoffs every year. And that, I think, is the perfect summation of
yep,
what team building should be.
hmm,
And then it might take the luck of, hey, we draft the Patrick Mahomes and he carries us over the line, or you get a bit of luck one year with the way the Eagles worked. The other bits then need to just click and go that way. But a GM's job is get to the playoffs each year.
yep,
And now that basically half the league get there, it shouldn't be too tough, and then see what happens.
yeah,
And I think Andrew Berry's done a really good job of he delivers that. Um,
yeah,
let luck
absolutely.
do the rest.
The last 4 years, I did. We went live on the guy people running the Browns now, as opposed to 10 years ago when it was a complete mess. Which is true. All right, well, that wraps it up. Thank you very much, Jack. Everybody, this is Jack Duffin at Jack Duffin on Twitter, Orange and Brown Report. Follow him. His pin tweets. He is on top of the salary cap. He recommends over the cap. Is that correct?
100%. It's by far the most accurate place to go. The
Yeah.
site begins with S, shall not be used.
Yeah, and it's a pleasure working with you. We'll get together again, I'm sure. And it was great. It was great to have you on. And I know we went a lot longer than I anticipated, but it's so interesting talking to you. And guys, hey, he's across the pond, and follow him on Twitter. He knows this stuff. And his friend and colleague Paul Brown as well. Orange and Brown Report. Jack, thank you again. And hey, hope you guys have a great holiday weekend. Thank you.
You too. Bye.
Bye. There you have it. The interview with Jack Duffin. Very informative, very good. So, to add a little bit more, it hiccup a little bit with my internet, but it looks like I'm still on. I didn't miss anything. I was talking about having competent people running the Cleveland Browns versus 10 years ago when it was Ray Farmer and Mike Pettin. That's right. You remember that when Johnny Manziel and Justin Gilbert were drafted, and within a year they were no longer employed by the Cleveland Browns, and rightfully so. So that wraps it up. Please, I'm seeing the likes, I'm seeing the comments, I'm seeing the sharing. Guys, I appreciate it. Always appreciate each and every one of you. Appreciate the show. And just remember, whenever I'll be back here tomorrow morning at 8:30, when the river burns, it burns brown and orange.